Hello all, a knife tale here, bringing you a knife review of this, as I put other things away at the start of the video. Peter Rassenti designed CKF Persian Integral. This is number 19 in M390. It is a frame lock, as all integrals are. And it's a flipper. Moving on to specs. I'm just going to go right to here. Blade length is between 3 5/8 and 3 3/4, so 3.7. Cutting edge is about 3 3/8 though, because you have this choil up here. Overall, 8 3/4. Handle, 5 inches. A little bit on the more handle side of things. Comparisons. See, this time I was smart. I put the CVV right with the comparison pad chart. I don't know. Elementum for the small knife, Conspirator for the full size, and the Persian for much larger than both of them. Though it is not a large knife. This is still, in my opinion, a full size, medium sized knife. It's on the large end of it. It's close, but not quite. And it certainly in hand does not feel super large. It just doesn't. Profiles. As you can pretty much see, this thing is not super tall. It is about as tall as the Conspirator. Yeah. At its highest point, to its highest point. Thickness. It's not that thick. It's pretty thin. My eternal fight with the calipers. Okay, do you think it's zeroed out? Okay, yeah. I'm going to give you two measurements. Actually, no, I'm going to give you one measurement. What you have to understand is this thing is bowled inwards in two spots. It's thickest right here and at the end. I'm going to measure at the thickest point. $547 thousandths. So at its thickest, it's about the same as the Conspirator. It's actually a little bit more than the Conspirator. It really doesn't feel it. Yeah, at its very thickest, it's about 547 thousandths. Most of the knife feels like it's down here at 467 thousandths. So it got two slopes in it. Or it's got one major swell, I should say. The blade stock thickness is quite robust. 170, I'm going to call that probably 175 thousandths. It's a thick blade stock. I'm honestly not sure why they decided to go with such a thick blade stock, but they did. As you can see, though, it doesn't have a giant edge bevel. Why is that? Because it's hollow ground. It also doesn't have a whole lot of room to drop down. Yet, behind the edge on this knife is somehow about 12 thousandths behind the edge. Might even be a little bit less than that. Now, I'm assuming these edge, yeah, like 11 thousandths. I'm assuming these are probably 20-degree bevels, or hopefully not steeper than that, but they're probably pretty steep. It does drop down pretty substantially. It is a very deep hollow grind. I mean, it has to be to get from this to this. Can we get it in there? Yeah, see how deep that is? It's an extremely deep hollow grind, and honestly, even going up behind the edge a bit, there's about 20 thousandths behind the edge. That's decently far up. So despite this extremely robust blade stock, you've got a cutting edge that's quite thin, and it's going to cut. Yes, you're going to have to push this thicker blade stock through the material because of the hollow grind, which is going to slow you down, but it does perform. It cuts pretty darn well. Yeah. I will say it wasn't the sharpest out of the box. It's good, and it cuts, but part of that's the geometry. It could have been a little tiny bit sharper out of the box, but I have used it a little bit, so I can't quite say that it's not partially me having used it. Weight on the CKF Persian, 5 ounces, which actually, considering this is an integral with no internal milling, because that's, I mean, I imagine some machine would be possible to do it, but it would be super hard. That's not that bad. This is not a heavy knife, especially for the size of this knife. Oh, and I did do my battery comparison, but as you can see, honestly, the batteries sort of line up with your grip. So if 2 double-way batteries are enough for you to sink your hand around, you should be fine. Hardware, which is, you know, there's a pivot. That is not a T8. I've not actually messed with this pivot. A lot of knives I do. A lot of CKF knives I do. Because they don't come with Loctite. This sucker has not moved. So, yeah, it's a T10. So, we've got T10 there, and my guess is lock bar insert is T8, pocket clip is T6, I mean T8, that's T8, that's T8, that's T10, there you go. You'll never have to mess with the pocket clip, it can't be reversed. You shouldn't have to mess with this unless you really use this over a long period of time, at which case maybe CKF can replace it, I don't know. These are one-off limited run things, so I don't know if they can or will, but they should be able to. But you probably will never have to do that either, because it's a steel lock bar on steel, and the lockup is really solid. Non-captive pivot. I do like captive pivots. CKF does like to not do captive pivots. I wish they would change that, but they don't always do it. And they seem to be doing it a little bit less and less as time progresses. At least that's my experience. If you look at my collection of CKF knives, it's inconsistent, but it does seem like the first ones all have it, and then some of them, they're tapering off a little. Maybe. Hopefully. Yeah. So, let's take a look at this knife. As I said, M390 with this sort of matte stonewash that's actually quite cool looking. It's got no reflectivity to it, but something about it, because of this heavy grain in the stonewash, where there is like the speckles almost have a reflectivity to them, but not quite, but it's heavy, so you can see it all. It's really nice. You got a hand satin on the flats, trailing clip point, definitely a Persian. I mean, Persians might be even more upward swept tip, but this is pretty close to it. The plunge grind starts here and ends here. You have all the life in the world to do whatever you want up here, which is good because this forward finger choil is barely a choil. I can use it, but it is close. Like, it's more of a, like, first knuckle kind of choil for just maybe slicing or something like that. It's not a get up in there and really shove your finger in there kind of choil, especially if you have bigger fingers. However, one thing I will say is, because of where this flipper tab stops me if I choke up, and this is just an observation, I land right here on this sort of like push grip. It is more comfortable than I thought it would be. It keeps me away from the edge, and this naturally acts as sort of a stop so my hand doesn't go any further forward. So I'm not actually into that choil as much as I thought. Like, I can actually choke up on this thing and really get in there without actually being as worried as I thought it would be. I'm not really making full use of the choil, but my finger is in it, so otherwise it's more just this. Also, as you can see, my fingers are beaten the crap out of. I have no idea what happened to them. Possibly has to do with the knives I've been handling. Probably. We have jimping back here that is a bit aggressive. It's wide jimping, but it definitely adds traction. I mean, it's pretty... If you really push into this thing, it's actually pretty aggressive. It hugs you back hard. But as just base, it does feel good. It gives you a nice place to put your finger. Or your thumb. Thumb is a finger, I think. Again, M390. This one's number 19. Peter Rassenti's mark. CKF mark. Blade is almost completely sterile. Something I do like about CKF. These are the stop pins in the open and closed position. You can see where they touch. Well, do they both touch? No, interesting. Only this one's a stop pin in the closed position. This one does not touch the lock bar. It's close, but it doesn't. And then they both contact this little protrusion up here on the frame. That's kind of hallmark Rassenti. He likes those external big old stop pins. The lockup is fantastic, and even though it doesn't look like you have a lot of lock bar access, in fact, it looks like you have very little, it's very... I mean, I have to come in a little bit from the front, not fully from the front, but a little bit off from the side, but it's still super easy because you have just such a long access and they chamfered all of this back. It's not hard at all. Moving on to the handle, the whole thing has a stonewash, a bit like the blade, honestly. Though there is a little bit more reflectivity you see coming through. The whole thing is finished really interesting. Like, it kind of looks like a gray blizzard. It's better than I thought it was going to be. It's more interesting than I thought it was going to be. When you see it in pictures and everything, it just looks like, okay, it's matte gray. No, it really isn't. It's just slightly more interesting than that. Again, we have the swell, which does add some level of comfort. My hand sort of sits there, so it, on this pad, sort of rides up onto it. And it's actually quite comfortable. The handle is very comfortable. The pocket clip basically disappears completely. The one bad thing is the pocket clip on this knife. The pocket clip on this knife is in a position where it's kind of sitting... Let's see if I can get it to do it. There we go. It can kind of slide down into the relief cut for the lock bar. Pretty easily, in fact. So that makes it really hard in and out of the pocket. It's also got surprisingly high amount of tension, probably a little too much. Honestly, the pocket clip needed to be shifted up a little bit, up to about here, so it sats purely squarely on the flat titanium. I don't think that would make it ride the edge too much. Just move it up a little bit. Maybe I could bend it up or something, I don't know. But I will say that is a little bit of an issue. Got to be fair where it is. a problem. Gotta mention that. The clip is Timascus, which, as in CKF fashion, looks great. They do great Timascus. Where was I? You've got sort of, again, Rassenti's hallmark styling. They're simple, but they've got those swells and just a few little design elements to the handles, just structural kind of things. It definitely gives his knives a certain style that you can see and recognize. The flipper tab is pretty darn low profile, but because of this little notch out here, you really do have good access to it. It's not jimped or anything, and it's not really sharp up here, but it does provide a lot of leverage. That's the word I'm looking for. A bit above the pivot. Hold on one second. Alright, I'm back. Sorry about that. I was distracted for a second there. Alright, pivot collar on one side. I kind of wish it was on both sides, but I can understand why it's not. It certainly probably would be harder to do it on both sides. It's probably hard enough to do it on one side with an integral, solid piece of titanium. More Zircuti, or Timascus. I think it's... yeah, that's gotta be Timascus. Doesn't look like Zircuti. This thing is running on, as far as I can tell, multi-row bearings, because, my word, it is smooth and drop shot. And this is how it came out of the box. It has not changed. It is centered. Yes, the tip can be touched, just a little bit, right here. But, one thing I will note is, despite it being so thin behind the edge, it does taper to being slightly thicker at the tip. So the tip, while being pointy, isn't like the sharpest in the same sense as running up against this thin blade edge. It gets a bit thick out there. You can kind of see it. So you're only touching kind of like the very edge of it, and it's not something that I've found has caused me any problem. And I don't find it even trying to cut me. But it can be touched, so it is to be noted. So the price on this thing, and this will be my first shout out to NC Blade, possibly. I like NC Blade. They've been really great. I've talked with them briefly a long time ago. They don't remember me. I wasn't anybody, but they always have they're a small business that provides things, but they're pretty much like the only primary CKF dealer in the US. I mean, occasionally you'll see other companies get some CKF knives, like Knife Center, but NC Blade is pretty much your primary and only way to go through, especially for pre-orders, which is cool. I'm glad that they got that shot and that they're making use of it, because they're very friendly. Very nice company. They have little messages they send with their knives and stuff like that. I very much like them as a vendor. And this knife on NC Blade is $479. Right now, as of recording, I can't tell you if it's going to stay that way, but for the new year, which we're still pretty far into the new year, this is still actually on sale for $359. That's $129... or $120, sorry, off. That's a really good price. I did not buy it at that price. And, I mean, honestly, you're not going to get an integral at this level for that kind of price point. You're not. $359? No. Especially when it's in collaboration with Rassenti, who does very expensive customs. So, if you've ever thought you might want this may be a good time. And again, shout out to NC Blade for what they do with bringing more CKF stuff to the market. I have something on on pre-order with them, CKF related, and I look forward to that. Other than that, this is a much more useful knife than it would appear. Yeah, the tip axis is kind of terrible. Of course, that's a Persian. But for slicing, for drawing sort of things, and just general cutting, it performs a lot better than you'd think it would after you see that blade stock. And in the hand, it's quite comfortable. And again, out of the box. Wonderful action, no play, centered on mine. I'm very happy with it. I do have a soft spot for CKF. I mean, they were originally a Russian company. I think they're still technically a Russian company, but I know a lot of their stuff is done in Slovakia now, I think it is. And, I mean, you can say what you want, but don't hold, in my opinion, a government against its people. Not entirely. That's probably going to be controversial, but I'm saying it. I, for certain things, especially when manufacturing is so dispersed across the world nowadays, you kind of just have to accept it. You can fight it, but it's going to be hard to find, and it's going to cost you a lot. Not that CKF knives are particularly cheap, but they are quite good. And this one is as well. That's all from me. I rambled on a bit too much here. I'll see you in the next one, guys.